My name is Heather, and I'm 31 years old. At my father's retirement party, he stood at the podium, thanked 70 people by name, his secretary, the mailman, even the caterer, and when someone asked, "What about Heather?" he laughed into the microphone and said, "She's not worth mentioning." 70 colleagues watched. My mother looked at her lap. My brother drank his water. And something I'd held inside for 3 years, quietly, patiently, like a document waiting to be filed, clicked into place. I stood up, walked to the podium, and set down a folder. His boss opened it before he could. What she read changed everything. For him, for my brother, and for a bridge that 10,000 people cross every day. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To a small town called Carver, and a little girl who kept taping certificates to a refrigerator that never wanted them. I grew up in Carver County, the kind of place where everyone knows your last name before they know your first. And in Carver, the name Anderson meant one thing. My father, Gerald, Director of Public Works, 35 years on the job. The man who approved every road, every drainage ditch, every sidewalk in town. He was important. Everyone told me so. My brother Kyle, 3 years older, was the proof. Dad brought Kyle to construction sites before he could tie his shoes. Introduced him at every county barbecue the same way. "This is my son. He'll carry on the family name." Kyle would beam, Dad would squeeze his shoulder, and I'd stand 2 steps behind, holding my own plate, waiting for my turn. My turn never came. I was good at math, loved physics, brought home honor roll certificates every semester like clockwork. I'd tape them to the refrigerator next to Kyle's football photos, his fishing trips with Dad, his first place ribbon from the county fair. By morning, my certificate would be gone. Not moved, gone. I asked my mother once. She said it must have fallen. It didn't fall. When I told my father I wanted to be an engineer, he didn't look up from the TV. When I showed him my geometry test, perfect score, he asked Kyle if practice went okay. One Thanksgiving, I was maybe 14, and I brought my science fair trophy to the table, set it right next to the turkey. Dad picked it up, read the inscription, and put it in the cabinet under the sink, where we kept the cleaning supplies. "Nobody cares about a piece of paper, Heather," he said. "Your brother actually does things." But I didn't give up. I thought if I tried hard enough, one day he'd finally see me. I was wrong, but wrong in a way I never could have imagined. Senior year, and I got accepted into state with a full ride, civil engineering. The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because I stood in the kitchen holding it for 20 minutes, rehearsing how I'd tell Dad. He wasn't home. He was at Kyle's community football game. Not a tournament, not playoffs, just a Saturday league scrimmage that happened to fall on the same evening as my high school graduation ceremony. Kyle had a game that day. My mother called from the bleachers, voice low so Dad wouldn't hear. "Ma, you know how your father is," she whispered. I'd heard that sentence 100 times. It was her version of an apology, soft enough to say, empty enough to mean nothing. Dad paid for Kyle's college, private school, business administration. Kyle moved into a dorm with a mini fridge and a flat screen. I moved into a shared apartment off campus with 2 roommates and a hot plate. Scholarship covered tuition. Everything else, books, food, gas, came from the diner where I waited tables 4 nights a week. Nobody in my family mentioned my major. Not once. Not when I made the dean's list. Not when I got the undergraduate research grant. Not when I was named top of my class in structural analysis. But they mentioned Kyle's promotion. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every phone call. The Thanksgiving I graduated, 22 years old, magna cum laude, bachelor's in civil engineering. Dad carved the turkey and said, "Oh, an engineer? What, you gonna build bridges?" Then he laughed. Kyle laughed too. I smiled and passed the gravy. Funny thing is, he was right. I would build bridges. Or more precisely, I'd fix the one he nearly destroyed. After graduation, I moved to Ridgemont, 45 minutes east of Carver, far enough to breathe. I landed a junior position at Marsh & Callaway Engineering. Small firm, serious work. Bridges, overpasses, municipal infrastructure. My boss, Elaine Marsh, founding partner, 55, the kind of woman who could read a load calculation the way most people read a menu, saw something in me early. She mentored me, pushed me, made me present at client meetings when I wanted to hide behind spreadsheets. I passed my PE exam at 27. Professional engineer. In my field, that's the license that says you're trusted to stamp drawings that keep people alive. Bridges, hospitals, schools. Your signature means, if this fails, wow, it's on you. I was one of the youngest PEs in the firm's history. I called home to share the news. Dad picked up. I passed my PE, I said. Silence. Then, Kyle just got promoted. Kyle had been hired at Dad's department, project coordinator at the county public works office. No engineering degree required. Dad pulled strings. Everyone in Carver knew it. Nobody said it. I hung up the phone and sat in my car for 15 minutes, and for the first time, yes, I let myself think the thought I'd been dodging my whole life. It wasn't that I hadn't done enough. It was that he never wanted me to do anything at all. That same week, Elaine gave me a piece of advice I didn't fully understand yet. She said, "Keep a copy of everything you sign. Everything. Every drawing, every email, every revision. That's not paranoia. That's professionalism." I listened. I filed. I saved. I didn't know that 2 years later, that habit would change everything. 3 years before the retirement party, Carver County broke ground on the Millbrook Bridge. If you're not from around here, you need to understand what that bridge meant. Millbrook Road was the main artery connecting the north side of the county, two schools, the regional hospital, a senior living facility, to the highway. The old bridge was 60 years old, weight restricted, and groaning every time a school bus crossed it. Replacing it wasn't optional, it was survival. For Dad, but it was more than infrastructure. It was legacy, the biggest project of his 35-year career. He managed the timeline, the budget, the contractors. His name was on every press release. The county newsletter ran a photo of him in a hard hat, standing on the riverbank, arms crossed, grinning like a man who'd just been handed a trophy. Then the inspectors found the problem. The original structural design, done by Dad's in-house team, had a critical flaw in the load-bearing pylons. And under projected traffic weight plus seasonal flooding stress, the pylons would degrade within 5 years, maybe less. The engineering term is progressive failure. The everyday term is the bridge could collapse. Dad panicked. Not publicly. Gerald Anderson didn't panic publicly. But behind closed doors, I later learned, he paced his office for 3 days straight. If word got out that his signature project had a fatal design flaw before construction was even finished, his reputation was done. 35 years, erased. Margaret Holt, the county administrator, Dad's boss, ordered an outside consultant. Independent structural review, non-negotiable. "I don't need outsiders telling me how to do my job," Dad told his team. But Margaret Holt wasn't asking, and the outside firm the county hired was mine. Elaine called me into her office on a Wednesday. She had the contract spread out on her desk. County seal, scope of work, deadline. A structural review and redesign of the Millbrook Bridge load-bearing system. "You're my best on bridge structures," she said. "This one's yours." My stomach dropped. "That's my father's project." Elaine took off her reading glasses, looked at me the way she always did when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. "Your job is the bridge, not your father's ego." She was right. I took the assignment. 2 weeks in, I realized the problem was worse than the initial report suggested. It wasn't just the pylons. The entire beam linkage system was underspecified. Wrong steel grade, insufficient cross-bracing, load paths that would funnel stress into exactly the wrong joints. If they'd built it as designed, that bridge would have been a countdown. I redesigned the entire load transfer system. 6 weeks, 14-hour days. I ran simulations until my eyes burned. Hell, I checked and rechecked every calculation until the numbers sang. The fix worked. The bridge would hold. When Dad found out his daughter was the consulting engineer, that I was the one who'd found his team's mistakes and rewritten their design, he didn't thank me. He called me on a Saturday night, voice tight as a wire. "You will not embarrass me," he said. "Fix it quietly, and your name stays off everything." Not a request, an order. At the same tone he'd used my whole life. The tone that said, "Sit down, be quiet, disappear." I fixed it, and I stayed quiet. That was my first mistake. The Millbrook Bridge opened on a bright October morning. The ribbon-cutting photos made the front page of the Carver County Gazette. Dad stood center frame, shaking hands with Margaret Holt, beaming. Behind him, the bridge gleamed, concrete and steel, clean lines stretching over the river. My design, his photo. Within a week, Dad erased me. Thus not figuratively, literally. He sent emails to the project office. Remove all references to external consultants from the Millbrook file. The official report credited the redesign to collaborative in-house engineering. My firm's name vanished. My PE stamp? Nowhere. But the worst part wasn't the erasure. The worst part was what he put in its place. Kyle signed the final engineering drawing submitted to the state. Kyle Anderson, supervising engineer. His signature, his printed name, right there on the PE certification line. Kyle, who had a business degree. Kyle, who couldn't tell a shear diagram from a shopping list. Kyle, who didn't hold a PE license because he'd never taken the exam, because he wasn't an engineer. In every state in this country, signing PE documents without a license is a violation of the State Engineering Practice Act. It's not a gray area, it's not a technicality, it's fraud. Fraud on a public safety document. I confronted Dad privately. It's just him and me, his kitchen, a Sunday afternoon. Dad, Kyle doesn't have a PE. That signature is illegal. He didn't blink. Mind your own business. Nobody asked you. So there it was, my choice. Speak up, destroy my family, send my father and brother into a legal nightmare. Stay quiet, become complicit in fraud on a bridge that school buses cross every morning. I chose silence. Because they were my family. Because I still believed that someday Dad would say thank you. 3 years passed. He never said thank you. He said something much worse, in front of 70 people. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering. You are cordially invited to celebrate 35 years of distinguished service. Gerald R. Anderson, Director of Public Works, Carver County. I held it for a long time. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching Dad take credit for my work. 3 years of holidays where no one mentioned the bridge, and my career, or the fact that I existed in any professional capacity. And now, an invitation. My mother had called the week before. Your father would love to see you there, Donna said. Would he? I wasn't sure. But something in me, the same something that kept taping certificates to the refrigerator at 14, wanted to believe it. Maybe retirement would soften him. Maybe without the job, without the title, without the need to perform, he'd just be a father. My father. I drove 4 hours. Bought a new blazer. Charcoal, professional, the kind of thing you wear when you want to be taken seriously. I wrote a card by hand. Congratulations, Dad. 35 years is something to be proud of. Heather. I meant every word. On the passenger seat inside my work bag sat a manila folder. I didn't bring it as a weapon. I brought it the way you bring an umbrella when the forecast says 20% chance of rain, hoping you won't need it, knowing you might. 3 years of documents. Good drawings, emails, the state board letter, all originals, all verified, all sitting in that folder since the day Dad told me to mind my own business. I merged onto the highway toward Carver and told myself, tonight will be different. The folder stayed in the bag. I didn't know yet that by the end of the night, it wouldn't. The Carver County Community Hall looked like it was hosting a wedding. White tablecloths, centerpieces with little American flags and miniature hard hats. A cute touch. Someone's idea of a joke. A banner stretched across the back wall. 35 years of service, Gerald Anderson. Below it, a projector screen cycled through a slideshow of Dad's career. I stood in the doorway and watched the photos scroll. Dad shaking hands with the governor. Dad at a groundbreaking. Dad and Kyle at a county picnic, matching polo shirts, arms around each other. Dad and Kyle at the Millbrook site. Dad and Kyle at Christmas. 40 photos. I counted. Not one included me. There was a family photo. I remembered the day it was taken, Kyle's 16th birthday. I'd been standing on Dad's left side, but the version on the screen was cropped. I was gone. I found my seat at the back table, near the door. the table closest to the exit. I didn't think about what that meant until later. Mom spotted me from across the room. She waved, a small flutter of fingers, but didn't get up. Kyle sat at the head table with Dad, shaking hands with county officials. At his suit too tight across the shoulders, he looked like a man playing a part he'd been rehearsing his whole life. Dad saw me. Our eyes met across 60 feet of white tablecloth and candle flame. He gave me a nod, the kind you give a distant acquaintance at the grocery store. Quick, polite, forgettable. A woman at my table leaned over. "Are you Gerald's daughter?" I said, her eyebrows lifted. "Oh, he never mentioned you." He never mentioned me. I should have been used to it by now. But hearing it from a stranger, that hit different. Margaret Holt took the podium at 7:30 sharp. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of authority you feel before you see. She tapped the microphone twice. "Good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to honor a man who has shaped this county's infrastructure for 35 years. Under his leadership, we've seen the Millbrook Bridge, the Route 9 expansion, at the downtown drainage overhaul, projects that will outlast all of us." She smiled. "Please join me in welcoming Gerald Anderson." Applause filled the room. Dad rose from the head table, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the podium like he'd been walking to podiums his whole life. Confident, measured, in control. He started with a joke about potholes. People laughed. Then he got serious. "I want to thank some people." My heart beat a little faster. He thanked Donna first. "My rock. I've 40 years of putting up with late nights and muddy boots." Mom dabbed her eyes. The room clapped. He thanked Kyle. "My son, the future of this family. I'm proud to say he's carrying on right where I left off." Kyle stood briefly. More applause. He thanked Janet, his secretary for 22 years. "She organized my life better than I ever could." He thanked Bill the mailman. The caterer, by first name, Rosa. The night security guard, Pete. The guy who fixed the copier. And each name was a stone, and I sat at the back table, sinking. He paused, scanned the room, smiled. "I think I've thanked everyone who matters." He set the microphone down, and from somewhere in the back row, a voice I didn't recognize, someone called out, "What about Heather?" 70 people turned to look at my father, and my father, microphone still warm in his hand, laughed. He picked the microphone back up, casual, like someone had asked about the weather. That he looked toward my table, not at me, toward me the way you glance at furniture, and said it. "She's not worth mentioning." 4 words, a microphone, 70 witnesses. The room didn't gasp. That only happens in movies. What actually happened was worse. Silence. The specific kind of silence where everyone looks down at their plates at the same time. Forks stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Someone coughed. Mom lowered her head. I could see her hands folded in her lap, as squeezing each other white. Kyle. I watched him. He didn't flinch, didn't turn around. He picked up his water glass and drank. Like nothing had happened, like his sister hadn't just been erased in front of every professional contact their father ever had. 70 people heard it. Not one said a word. And in that silence, I understood something I'd been circling for 31 years. Their silence wasn't agreement. But it also wasn't protection. It was nothing. Now, and nothing, when you needed someone to stand up, was the same as siding with him. 3 years. 3 years I'd kept that folder in my desk drawer. 3 years of waiting for him to call, to acknowledge, to say the 2 words that would have made everything different. And his answer, broadcast through a PA system to every engineer, contractor, and county official in Carver, was not worth mentioning. Something shifted inside me. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. Yet the kind of clarity that doesn't burn. It focuses, like a lens pulling light into a single sharp point. I looked down at my bag. The folder was inside. It had been inside for 3 years. Not anymore. I stood up. The chair scraped against the hardwood, a sound louder than it should have been, or maybe the room was just that quiet. Mom reached for my arm. Her fingers closed around my wrist, gently, the way she always did, as if gentleness made up for everything she never said. Sit down, honey. Don't make a scene." I looked at her hand, then at her face, and for the first time in my life, I didn't do what she asked. "I'm not making a scene, Mom. I'm just not sitting down anymore. I pulled my wrist free. Not roughly. Slowly. The way you set something down that you've been carrying too long. I reached into my bag and took out the folder. Manila. Ordinary. The kind you buy in a 10-pack at the office supply store. It weighed almost nothing in my hand. Yeah, but it held 3 years of silence. Every drawing, every email, every piece of proof that I existed in the story my father had spent his career rewriting. I walked between the tables. Left side, right side, white cloth and candlelight, and 70 pairs of eyes tracking me like I was crossing a courtroom. My heels clicked on the hardwood, steady, even, one step at a time. I could hear Elaine's voice in my head, but from a conversation months ago when I'd almost shredded the whole thing. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be placed where it belongs. Dad stood at the podium, microphone still in his hand, and as I got closer, 5 tables away, then 3, then 1, I saw something on his face I'd never seen before. He looked afraid. I stepped onto the riser, stood beside him, and said, quietly, so he had to lean in, 7 words. Before I leave, there's one thing Dad forgot to mention. My voice carried. Not because I raised it, because the room was so silent that a whisper would have echoed. Dad's jaw tightened. Heather, sit down. Low, through his teeth. A command, not a request. I didn't sit down. I placed the folder on the podium, gently, the way you lay down a hand of cards, and turned to the front table. Mrs. Holt, I said, this concerns the Millbrook Bridge project. As county administrator, I believe you should see this. Margaret Holt had been watching the whole exchange with the kind of expression that comes from 30 years in public administration, composed, assessing, giving away nothing. But when I said Millbrook, something behind her eyes sharpened. She stood, walked to the podium, reached for the folder. Dad's hand shot out. He grabbed the edge. That's personal. Margaret didn't flinch. She held his gaze the way you'd hold a door. Firm, final. If it concerns a county project, it's not personal, Gerald. She took the folder, opened it. The first page, my structural drawings, PE stamp, and signature in the lower right corner, caught the overhead light. She turned to page 2, the emails. I watched her eyes move left to right, her lips pressed together. Page 3, Kyle's signature on the state filing. Supervising engineer. She looked up, and I'll never forget this. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Dad. She looked at Kyle. And in that moment I thought, was this the right thing to do? 3 years I held this. 3 years I chose family over truth. If you'd been standing where I was, holding proof, watching your father laugh at your existence in front of 70 people, would you have opened the folder, or would you have walked away? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Margaret turned another page, then another. Then she looked up at my father. And every trace of celebration drained from the room like water from a cracked glass. Dad snatched the folder from Margaret's hands. Papers scattered. 2 sheets slid off the podium and drifted to the floor like leaves. This is a family matter. His voice cracked on the word family. I'd never heard that before. Margaret's tone dropped 10 degrees. Gerald, those are county engineering documents with signatures I need to verify. Hand it back. He didn't. Instead, he turned to the room. 70 faces, some stunned, some confused, most very still, and did what Gerald Anderson had always done best. He performed. His shoulders softened, his chin dipped. When he spoke, his voice had the careful tremor of a man who's been wounded. Folks, I'm sorry about this. He shook his head slowly. My daughter has always had issues. She's been estranged from the family for years. We've tried everything. He looked at me with a sadness so practiced it almost felt real. She's been troubled for years. We've tried everything. And it worked, for about 5 seconds. I saw it ripple through the room. A few sympathetic nods. A woman near the front clutched her napkin. Someone whispered, "How sad." Dad was good at this. He could rewrite a room in 30 seconds. I'd watched him do it my entire childhood, reshaping every story, every situation, until he was the hero and I was the problem. But this time, Margaret Holt was holding 3 pages of county documents. And documents don't respond to tone of voice. Margaret knelt, picked up the fallen sheets, and straightened them against the podium. "Gerald," she said, not unkindly, "I'm going to need these back." Dad's performance faltered, because Margaret wasn't looking at him with sympathy. She was looking at him the way an auditor looks at a discrepancy. That Margaret took the folder back. This time, Dad didn't resist. She read methodically. No drama, just a woman doing her job at a speed that made the room hold its breath. First, my structural drawings. PE stamp number 47,832. My signature, Heather M. Anderson, PE, in clean black ink. Then, the emails, 7 of them, all from Gerald's county address to the project office. She read one line aloud. Not for theater. I think she couldn't help it. Remove all references to external consultants from the Millbrook file. She looked up. You told the board the redesign was done in-house. Dad's chin lifted. It was a team effort. Margaret turned the page. The state filing. The PE certification document submitted to the State Department of Transportation. Kyle's signature. Kyle's printed name. The line that read Supervising Engineer, PE license number, and next to it, a number that didn't exist in any state registry. Margaret stared at the page for a long time, then she turned to Kyle. He was still at the head table, napkin in his lap, looking like a man watching his own car slide off a cliff in slow motion. "Kyle," Margaret said, calm as a doctor reading test results. "Do you hold a PE license?" The room shifted. Engineers in the audience, and there were several, sat up straighter. They knew what that question meant. Kyle's mouth opened. His eyes went to Dad, the reflex of a lifetime, the automatic search for someone to answer for him. But Dad was frozen at the podium, mic in hand, no script, no rehearsal. For the first time in my memory, Gerald Anderson had nothing to say. Kyle was on his own. Kyle's voice came out thin, stripped of the confident handshake tone he'd been using all evening. "Dad told me to sign. I didn't know it was a problem." The whisper that moved through the room wasn't surprise. It was recognition. 70 people doing the math at the same time. Engineers, contractors, county officials. Every one of them understood what a PE signature meant, and every one of them understood what it meant when someone signed without one. Margaret turned back to Dad. "Gerald, you were project manager? You supervised Kyle's involvement?" Dad straightened, tried to recover. "He was supervised. I supervised him." Margaret didn't blink. "You're a project manager, Gerald. You don't hold a PE either." Silence, but a different kind now. And not the awkward silence of a family squabble. This was the silence of people realizing they were watching something official, something with consequences. This wasn't a daughter making a scene at her father's party. This was a county engineering matter unfolding in real time. Mom stood. Her chair squealed against the floor. Her voice shook. "Can we please not do this here?" Every head turned to me, waiting. "Yeah, and I said the thing I'd been holding for 3 years. The reason the folder existed at all. I tried doing this privately 3 years ago, Mom. Dad told me to mind my own business." Mom sat back down, slowly, like the air had left her. Dad gripped the podium with both hands. His knuckles were white, his face was red, and when he spoke, the microphone caught every word. "This is my retirement party. Not a courtroom." But Margaret Holt was already sliding the documents back into the folder. Carefully, completely, the way you handle evidence. That's when Dad broke character. He turned on me. Full rotation, shoulders squared, microphone forgotten in his fist. His voice was raw. No performance, no audience management. Just 31 years of something ugly finally reaching the surface. "I gave you a roof. I gave you food. And this is how you repay me?" The room flinched. Not at the words, at the tone. This was the Gerald Anderson nobody in this room had ever seen. The private one. The one who spoke behind closed doors, in kitchens, in hallways. The one only his family knew. I didn't step back. I didn't raise my voice. "You gave me a roof, Dad, but you never gave me a seat at the table. Not even tonight." Something shifted in the room. I could feel it. A change in gravity. A few people at the side tables nodded. Small movements, almost involuntary. From Janet, Dad's secretary of 22 years, sitting 3 tables away, pulled a tissue from her purse and pressed it to her eyes. Dad looked around the room, searching, scanning, looking for an ally, a sympathetic face, someone to back his version of the story. No one met his eyes. Kyle stared at the tablecloth. Mom's face was buried in her hands. The county officials at the front table studied their plates like they were reading blueprints. Margaret Holt closed the folder, then tucked it under her arm, and said, with the precision of a woman who had run this county for 12 years, "Gerald, I'll need to review this with legal on Monday. I suggest you enjoy the rest of your evening." Everyone understood. The party was over. Janet caught my arm as I stepped down from the riser. Her hand was warm, her eyes were wet. "I always wondered who really fixed that bridge. Let me tell you what was in that folder. All of it." But first, the structural redesign drawings for the Millbrook Bridge load transfer system, 23 pages, every one of them bearing my PE stamp, number 47,832, and my signature. Heather M. Anderson, PE. These were the drawings that replaced the flawed original design, the ones that ensured the bridge could carry school buses and ambulances and 18-wheelers for the next 100 years. Second, 7 emails from Gerald Anderson's county email account to the Carver County Project Office, and each one a variation of the same directive. Remove Marsh and Callaway Engineering from the project record. Remove external consultant references. Credit the redesign to in-house collaboration. In one email, dated 3 days after the bridge opened, he wrote, and I'll never forget the phrasing, "Clean this up, I don't want any loose ends." I was a loose end. Third, a formal letter from the State Board of Professional Engineers, addressed to me by name, recognizing my exceptional structural analysis contributing to the safety of the Millbrook Bridge. The board had sent it after reviewing the revised design as part of their routine post-construction audit. Dad never knew about this letter, because he never asked. Fourth, the internal audit results I'd obtained through a public records request. Freedom of Information Act, perfectly legal. And those results showed that Kyle Anderson had signed PE-certified documents on 3 separate occasions without holding a PE license. A clear violation of the State Engineering Practice Act. I didn't bring that folder to the party for revenge. I brought it because 3 years ago, my father told me to mind my own business. Tonight, he told 70 people I wasn't worth mentioning, and I decided, if he wouldn't tell the truth, the documents would. "Beck, a PE stamp isn't a formality," I said to no one and everyone. "It means a licensed engineer takes legal responsibility for public safety." Kyle didn't have that authority. Dad knew. After Margaret closed the folder, she turned to me. Not with pity, not with gratitude, with something rarer, professional respect. "Ms. Anderson," she said, "I wish I'd known this 3 years ago." Ms. Anderson, not Heather, not Gerald's daughter. Ms. Anderson, the way you address a colleague. But it was the first time anyone in that room had spoken my name like it carried weight of its own, separate from my father's. The ripple started slow. Tom Reeves, senior engineer in Dad's department, 30 years on the job, the kind of man who speaks only when he has something worth saying, pushed back his chair and walked over. He extended his hand. "The load transfer redesign," he said. "That was yours?" I shook his hand. "Yes." He held it an extra second. That was brilliant work." Behind him, 2 more engineers stood. One of them, a woman I didn't know, maybe 40, county ID badge on her lapel, said quietly, "I reviewed those drawings last year for the maintenance assessment. The shear wall integration was, I wondered who'd done it." Dad stood at the podium, microphone still in his hand. But the room had rotated, like a planet shifting its axis, and he was no longer at the center. No one looked at him. Kyle sat frozen, white-faced, his water glass untouched, sweating a ring onto the tablecloth. Mom pulled at my sleeve from behind. When had she walked over? Her voice was thin. "Please, let's just go home." I turned to her. My mother, the woman who'd spent 40 years translating Dad's cruelty into something softer, something survivable. "You know how your father is." I said, "I am going home, Mom. My home." And I meant it in every way a sentence can be meant. I picked up my bag from the back table. The blazer I'd bought for tonight, charcoal, professional, chosen with care, felt like armor now. I walked toward the exit. Steady. Not fast. Not slow. The way you leave a place you're never coming back to. Dad caught me at the door. He must have come off the riser fast, because he was slightly out of breath. His hand closed around my elbow. Not hard, but firm enough to stop me. If you walk out that door, you're not my daughter anymore. The hallway was empty. But the main doors were open, and half the room could hear us. He knew. He wanted them to hear. One last attempt to make me the villain. I turned to face him. My father, 63 years old, 35 years of public service, a career built on the careful management of what people believed about him. I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his eyes. Dad, I said, I've been not your daughter my whole life. Tonight's the first time you said it out loud. His hand dropped. And I don't know what I expected, a retort, a denial, an explosion. But what I got was nothing. Gerald Anderson, the man who always had a speech, a redirect, a reframe, stood in the doorway of the Carver County Community Hall with nothing left to say. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. The night air was cool. October. Crickets. The parking lot half full, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My phone vibrated before I reached my car. Found a text from a number I didn't recognize. Margaret Holt. Can we meet Monday? There are things I need to discuss with you, professionally. I got in my car, turned the key, and drove. The highway was empty. 4 hours of dark road, white lines, the occasional pair of headlights coming from the other direction. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone, just drove. I thought I'd feel satisfied. The word revenge suggests something that tastes good, sweet, or at least sharp. But what I felt driving home that night wasn't satisfaction. It was emptiness. Not the bad kind, the clean kind. Like walking through a room you've finally finished clearing out after years of stepping around the mess. Around the 2-hour mark, I called Elaine. She picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it, really thought. Like I finally handed in the last report. She laughed, soft, knowing. At the laugh of a woman who had seen enough in 55 years to understand that some victories don't feel like victories. They feel like the end of something you didn't realize had been exhausting you. You didn't burn the bridge, Heather, she said. You just proved who actually built it. I smiled. First time in hours. The miles scrolled by. I thought about Dad's face when Margaret opened the folder, about Kyle's silence, about Mom's hand on my wrist. Sit down. At honey. And the 20 years of sit down, honey that had come before it. I thought about what Dad said. Not worth mentioning. And I realized maybe he was right. Not in the way he meant it, but in a different way. I didn't need to be mentioned. My work spoke for itself. It had always spoken for itself. I'd just been waiting for the wrong person to listen. I got home at 1 a.m, set my bag on the counter. It was lighter now. The folder was gone. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. At Margaret Holt's office on the 3rd floor of the Carver County Administrative Building. She had the folder open on her desk. Next to it, a legal pad with 2 pages of notes already filled in her sharp handwriting. A cup of coffee sat untouched, which told me this meeting had started before I arrived. Sit down, Ms. Anderson. I sat. Margaret didn't waste time. The state board letter? This is authentic? You can call them directly. My license number is on record. She made a note. Ed then looked up. Not as a boss, not as an investigator, as a person. Why didn't you come forward earlier? The honest answer was the only answer I had. He's my father. I thought he'd eventually do the right thing. Margaret nodded, slowly, the kind of nod that says I understand more than you think. I've referred the file to the county attorney's office, she said. They'll review the PE signature issue and the email directives. I've also requested a comprehensive audit of all engineering filings from the past 10 years under Gerald's department. 10 years. Every project Dad had touched. Kyle, she continued, has been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. He was notified this morning. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not guilt. Not exactly. More like the weight of knowing that a thing you set in motion has its own momentum now. You can start an avalanche. You can't steer it. So Margaret called the state board that afternoon. They confirmed my PE status, confirmed the recognition letter, and opened a preliminary inquiry into Kyle's unlicensed signatures. A formal investigation would follow. The wheels were turning, and they didn't need me to push them anymore. 3 things happened in the 2 weeks after the party. First, the county canceled Gerald's formal recognition ceremony, the one scheduled for next month. And with the plaque and the framed resolution and the photo with the county board, Margaret's office released a one-line statement. The ceremony has been postponed pending an internal review. In a town like Carver, that sentence was a grenade. Second, the bronze plaque at the Millbrook Bridge, the one that read, "Dedicated to Gerald R. Anderson, Director of Public Works," was removed for updating. Everyone in town drove past that empty space on the bridge rail and knew exactly what it meant. And third, the county board scheduled a public hearing on engineering document procedures, open to the public. Agenda Item 1, PE certification compliance in county infrastructure projects. Dad was retired. He couldn't be fired. But the thing he valued more than any paycheck, his legacy, his name, the story of Gerald Anderson that the whole county had accepted as truth for 35 years, was being rewritten in real time. He called me on a Wednesday night. I almost didn't answer. You destroyed this family." His voice was flat. No performance, no audience, just him. "No, Dad. You built a family where only one child counted. I just stopped pretending I was okay with it." He hung up. Mom called an hour later. "Your father can't sleep, he's devastated." I closed my eyes. "I couldn't sleep for 3 years, Mom. Did anyone call to ask about me?" Silence. The long kind. The kind where you can hear someone realizing that the answer is no, and that no is enough. She said, "I'll talk to you later, honey." She didn't call back for a month. Kyle called on a Saturday, late afternoon. The sun was going down outside my apartment window, and I was doing what I always did on Saturdays, reviewing drawings, drinking cold coffee, pretending the silence didn't bother me. His name on the screen made me pause. Kyle and I hadn't spoken directly, without Dad as moderator, in years. "Hey." His voice was smaller than I remembered. The conference room confidence was gone. "Oh, hey." Long pause. I could hear him breathing. "Did you have to do it in front of everyone?" I set my coffee down. "You watched him say I wasn't worth mentioning, in front of everyone." Another silence. I let it sit. I'd spent my whole life filling silences for other people, smoothing, accommodating, making it easier for everyone but myself. Not anymore. "I didn't know the PE thing was that serious," he finally said. "I know." That was it. I didn't accuse him, didn't lecture. I just confirmed what we both understood. Kyle hadn't known, because Dad had never told him, because Dad needed Kyle to sign without asking questions. "Kyle, hire your own attorney. Not Dad's, yours." "Why?" "Because Dad's attorney is going to protect Dad. You need someone who protects you." More silence. Then very quietly, "I'm sorry I never stood up for you." I looked out the window. The streetlight had come on. "I know that too." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking. If Dad had treated us equally, if Kyle had never been handed a role he wasn't qualified for, if I'd never been erased from the record, would any of this have happened? I don't think so. Dad didn't just harm me, he harmed Kyle too, just in a different way. Do you think Kyle deserves consequences? Or is he another casualty of Gerald's control? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Carver is a small town. By the end of the week, everybody knew. Not the full story. Small towns don't deal in full stories. They deal in fragments, in whispered versions, in the sentence you overhear at the hardware store. But the fragments were enough. The local paper ran it first. Front page, below the fold. County reviews engineering records after retirement party revelations. No names in the headline, but the article mentioned a former department head and irregularities in PE certification documents. In Carver, that was as good as a billboard. Within a month, the ripples reached every corner of Dad's world. The Rotary Club, where he'd been a member for 20 years, where he sat at the head table every monthly dinner, sent a letter, politely worded, carefully phrased. The gist, perhaps it would be best if he took a step back from active participation until the matter was resolved. Neighbors stopped waving, not all of them, but enough. the ones who mattered to Dad, the ones whose waves he counted like currency. Then Kyle received formal notification from the State Board of Professional Engineers, an official investigation into unlicensed practice. If the board found a violation, the penalties could include fines and a permanent record. And while Kyle had never actually been an engineer, that signature on official state documents was as real as concrete. Mom called one more time. Her voice had a new edge. Not anger at me, but something close to surrender. Are you happy now? I thought about it, honestly. No, Mom, I'm not happy, but I'm honest. And for the first time, so is everyone else. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something she'd never said before. I should have spoken up years ago. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Margaret Holt called Elaine in November. I was at my desk when Elaine walked in, leaned against the doorframe, and smiled. The specific smile she reserves for good news she's been holding for at least an hour. The county just signed a 3-year retainer with us, she said. Infrastructure consulting. Bridges, drainage systems, road specifications, the whole portfolio. I looked up from my screen. That's great. Guess who they requested as lead engineer? I didn't need to guess. The retainer was official. My name, my real name, attached to my real credentials, would be on every Carver County infrastructure project going forward. Not hidden, not erased, not credited to someone else. Mine. And a week later, I drove past the Millbrook Bridge and noticed the plaque had been replaced. The new one read, Millbrook Bridge, Carver County, Structural Redesign, Marsh & Callaway Engineering. No individual names. But in my industry, the firm credit was enough. Anyone who looked it up would find the project file. And in the project file, they'd find me. Tom Reeves, the senior engineer from Dad's department, sent me an email that evening. No subject line, just one paragraph. Ms. Anderson. I reviewed your Millbrook redesign in detail during the audit last week. The shear wall integration, the load path redistribution, the pylon reinforcement sequence. It's some of the best structural work I've seen in 30 years. The county is lucky to have you on retainer. Tom. I read it 3 times. Then I printed it out and put it in my desk drawer. Not because I needed proof, but because sometimes, after 31 years of silence, it's nice to have the words on paper. And just to know they're real. 6 months later, Dad was not arrested, not charged, not dragged before a court. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways, worse. The county attorney concluded that Gerald's actions, directing the removal of consultant records and facilitating unlicensed PE signatures, were administrative violations, not criminal ones. He was already retired. There was no employment action to take. And the county issued a formal reprimand for the record and referred Kyle's case to the state board for independent adjudication. But the real punishment, the one that mattered in a place like Carver, was the redefinition. Gerald Anderson's 35-year story was no longer the one he'd written. The bridge that was supposed to be his crowning achievement now had someone else's firm on the plaque. The hearing transcripts were public record. And the newspaper clipped them and filed them in the archive at the Carver County Library, right next to 35 years of flattering press releases. Kyle told me, in one of our occasional text exchanges, that Dad stayed home most days now. Didn't go to the diner for coffee, didn't walk the dog past the county building anymore. He watched TV. He read the paper. He didn't mention me. Mom sent a letter. Handwritten, on stationery I remembered from childhood, pale blue, and her initials embossed at the top. I know I was wrong to stay quiet. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know, I see you. I always saw you. I was just too afraid to say it. I read it at my kitchen table, and I cried. Not because it fixed anything, it didn't, but because after 31 years, my mother finally said the thing I'd been waiting to hear from the wrong parent. It wasn't an ending, but it was a door, barely open, letting in a thin line of light. Now I drove to the Millbrook Bridge on a Tuesday morning. No reason, just wanted to see it. It was early, 7:15, the sky still pink at the edges. A school bus crossed going north, then a delivery truck, then a woman in a minivan with 2 car seats in the back. The bridge held. It didn't groan, it didn't flex. It carried them the way a bridge is supposed to, silently, invisibly, without asking for recognition. Nobody on that bus knew my name. And nobody in that truck had any idea who redesigned the load transfer system or spent 6 weeks running simulations until the numbers worked. They didn't need to know. They just needed the bridge to hold, and it held. I stood on the walkway and looked down at the river. The water was low, early spring, snowmelt still a few weeks away. The pylons I'd redesigned rose out of the riverbed like quiet sentinels. I don't tell this story so you'll think my father is a monster. He's not. He's a man. A man who grew up believing daughters don't build things, and who spent his whole life making sure that belief didn't get challenged. He was wrong, but he was human. And there's a difference between understanding someone and accepting what they did to you. I don't need him to call. I spent 31 years waiting for a phone call that was never coming, and the waiting was its own kind of prison. I'm done waiting. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. You choose who walks through. You choose when. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight. It's to set down the truth, quietly, in front of the people who need to see it, and let it do the rest. Here's where I am now. Lead engineer at Marsh & Callaway. The county retainer keeps me busy. 3 projects in the pipeline, 2 more in review. Elaine keeps threatening to make me a partner. I keep telling her to give me another year. My apartment is the same one. Small. Second floor, nothing fancy. My car still has 140,000 miles on it, but on the wall above my desk, framed, centered, lit by the window, is my PE certificate. First time I've ever hung it up. It seems like a small thing. It's not. Mom and I talk once a month. Short calls, light topics, weather, neighborhood gossip, the new bakery on Main Street. We don't talk about Dad. We don't talk about the party. But we talk. And there's a boundary now. Clear, gentle, real, that we both respect. Dad doesn't call. I don't expect him to. Some silences aren't punishments. They're answers. And I've learned to accept the answer. Kyle texts sometimes. Simple stuff. Hey, how are you? No exclamation marks, no emojis, just checking in. He hired his own attorney, cooperated with the state board, and, for the first time in his life, started figuring out who he was without Dad directing the show. Last I heard, he was taking night classes. I didn't ask in what, but I was glad. I don't have a Hollywood ending. Nobody showed up at my door with flowers and an apology. Nobody made a grand speech about how wrong they'd been. The family didn't gather around a table and cry and hug and promise to do better. But I have something I never had before. Peace. The quiet, sturdy kind. The kind that holds weight. If you're listening to this and you've stayed this long, which tells me something about you, I want to say one thing. Not as advice. And not as a lesson. Just as something I wish someone had told me a long time ago. If you are in a family where your silence is mistaken for agreement, you are allowed to speak. Not with shouting. Not with cruelty. With truth. Simple, documented, undeniable truth. And if you are carrying a folder, literal or otherwise, you don't have to open it. But you deserve to know that it's yours. That it exists. That the proof of who you are and what you've done is real. And even if the people closest to you refuse to see it. I drive across the Millbrook Bridge every morning on my way to work. Every single morning. And every time I feel the road beneath my tires. Smooth, solid, holding steady. And I know 2 things. The bridge stands, and so do I. Thank you for staying until the end. If you've ever kept quiet longer than you should have, or if you're still deciding whether to speak, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please hit like and subscribe. It's the best way to help other people find it. People who might be sitting at their own back table right now, waiting to be mentioned. And if you want to hear what happened next, because there is a next, I've left a link in the description to another story you might recognize yourself in. Click it when you're ready. I'll be here. Heather. This is our other daughter. She cleans houses for a living, my mother told the groom's family, smiling like she was apologizing for a stain on the tablecloth. My father nodded, added, "We've given up on her." 32 guests heard it. I heard it louder than all of them. What my mother didn't know, what she never once bothered to ask, was that cleaning houses had turned into a company spanning 14 states. And the woman sitting directly across from me, the groom's mother, I was about to say something that would drain every last drop of color from my mother's face. Before I go on, if this story speaks to you, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? I'm Morgan. I'm 32, and this is the night I stopped asking my family to see me. Let me take you back to a Saturday evening in September, the night of my sister Lauren's engagement dinner. Now, I was 3 years old when Janet and Richard Meadows brought me home. Ridgewood, Indiana. Population 4,000, one traffic light, and a whole lot of opinions about other people's business. For the first 4 years, I was the miracle. The little girl the Meadows family chose. Pastor Collins mentioned it every Thanksgiving. Neighbors baked casseroles. Janet carried me on her hip at church like a living badge of generosity. Then Lauren was born. I remember the exact week things shifted. And not because anyone said anything cruel, not yet, but because the house rearranged itself around her. My bedroom moved to the converted attic. My drawings came off the refrigerator to make room for Lauren's hospital bracelet, framed in pink. My car seat went to the garage. By the time I was 10, the narrative had solidified. Lauren was the dancer, the honor student, the one Janet described to neighbors as our girl. I was the other one. The project. The charity case they kept feeding. "Whoosh, we tried our best with Morgan," Janet would say at the mailbox, loud enough for Mrs. Patterson next door to hear. "Some things just aren't in the blood." She said it like she was talking about a stain she couldn't lift. Richard never corrected her, not once. He'd sit in his recliner, turn a page of the newspaper, and let the silence do his talking. That silence was louder than anything Janet ever said, because Janet's cruelty came with a smile. Richard's came with permission. And I learned early, in this house, love had a guest list, and my name was never on it. But there was one thing Janet Meadows never bothered to learn about me, and that one thing would eventually change everything. I graduated from Ridgewood High on a Tuesday. Janet didn't come. Lauren had a dance recital the same afternoon, 2 towns over. Richard said he'd try to make it. He didn't. I packed 2 duffel bags that night and moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat in Greenfield. At 18 years old, $400 in a savings account I'd built from babysitting since I was 13. I enrolled in community college, night classes. During the day, I cleaned houses. It wasn't glamorous. It was toilets and baseboards and oven grease and strangers' hair and shower drains. But it was mine. Every dollar I earned on my knees, literally, and nobody could tell me I didn't deserve it. Janet told her friends at church, "Lauren starts at IU next month." Morgan chose a different path. She said different the way people say terminal. I called home on Sundays. Janet was always busy. Richard didn't pick up. When I got my first business license, a real one, framed, my name printed in black ink, I took a photo and texted it to Janet. She replied, "Cute. One word, no period, no follow-up." I almost quit that week, almost drove back to Ridgewood, walked into that house and begged them to just see me. Just once. But then Grace Whitfield happened. She was 74, lived alone on Maple Court, and she was my very first client. One afternoon, while I was scrubbing her kitchen tile, she set down a glass of sweet tea and said, "Honey, you clean better than any company I've ever hired. You should expand." That was the seed, planted by a stranger, watered by every year my family refused to look. 14 years later, I got the invitation. Cream-colored cardstock, gold foil lettering. Lauren Meadows and Kevin Holloway. Engagement dinner. Millbrook Grill. Saturday, September 14th, 6 o'clock. I was still reading it when my phone buzzed. Janet. "Morgan, we need to talk about Saturday." I could already hear it, the stage directions. "The Holloways are very well respected," she said. "Kevin's mother runs some kind of company. Big money people. I don't want you to, draw attention." "Draw attention how?" "Just don't bring up your work, okay? The cleaning thing. It's not the kind of impression we need." I held the phone away from my face for 3 seconds. Breathed. "You don't want me to mention my job. I want you to blend in. That's all I ask. Blend in." That was always the instruction. Not be yourself. Not we're proud of you. Just disappear politely. I almost said no. almost deleted the invitation, and spent Saturday night reviewing quarterly reports at my kitchen table. That would have been easier, safer. But then Lauren called. And separately, quietly, the way she always did when Janet wasn't in the room. "Hey sis, I really want you there. Please come." She sounded like the 4-year-old who used to crawl into my attic bed during thunderstorms, before Janet taught her that needing me was weakness. "I'll be there," I said. Saturday evening, I stood outside Millbrook Grill at 6:47 p.m. I straightened my blouse, checked my reflection in the window, took one breath. I had no idea that Diane Holloway would be inside, and I had no idea what she would recognize. And I had no idea that within 2 hours, every person in my family would wish I had never walked through that door. Millbrook Grill was the nicest restaurant in Ridgewood, which meant white tablecloths, candles in mason jars, and a wine list that went up to $40. For this town, that was black tie. The private dining room held about 30 people. Long rectangular table in the center, a smaller round table tucked near the window for overflow. I have fresh flowers, soft jazz through a ceiling speaker. I walked in on time, hair pinned up, navy dress, modest neckline. I looked professional. I looked like someone who belonged. Janet didn't greet me. She was mid-conversation with a woman I didn't recognize, hand on the woman's arm, laughing too loudly. When she saw me, her expression didn't change. It just paused. "Oh, you made it. There's a spot over there." She tilted her chin toward the round table. "The main table's full." I glanced at the long table, counted the chairs. There was one empty, right next to Lauren. A cream-colored handbag sat on the seat, Janet's handbag. She followed my eyes, didn't move it. I walked to the round table and sat next to a second cousin whose name I couldn't remember. He was already on his second beer and barely looked up. From here I could see the whole room but felt invisible in it, which I realized was exactly Janet's design. Then Kevin spotted me. Bet he broke away from his conversation, walked over, extended his hand. "You must be Morgan. Lauren talks about you. I'm glad you're here." Before I could answer, Janet appeared at his elbow. "Kevin, sweetheart, come meet Aunt Ruth. She just flew in from Florida." She steered him away without looking at me, like redirecting traffic from a dead end. The main course hadn't arrived yet when Diane Holloway asked the question. She was seated near the head of the table, silver hair, and sharp posture, the kind of presence that made waitstaff stand straighter. She'd been watching the room all evening, watching Janet perform. "And the young woman by the window?" Diane asked, turning to Janet. "Is she also your daughter?" Janet hesitated. 1 second, but I caught it. "Oh, that's Morgan. She's adopted." She lowered her voice just enough to make it sound confidential. "Yeah, she cleans houses for a living." She said it the way you'd explain a blemish on an otherwise clean report. Richard was buttering a roll. Without looking up, he added, "We've given up on her." Given up? He said it like returning a library book, calmly, completely. The table went quiet, not dramatically, just that half-second pause where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their silverware. A woman near the end coughed softly. Kevin's younger brother looked at his plate. But I sat 12 feet away, and I heard every syllable. My hands were under the table. I pressed my nails into my palms. Then I looked at Diane Holloway. She wasn't looking away like the others. She wasn't embarrassed. She was looking directly at me, steady, focused, the way you look at someone when you're trying to place a face. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, in recognition. Something shifted behind her expression, a flicker, a connection forming. I didn't understand it yet. So I didn't know what she'd seen or where she'd seen it. All I knew was that the way she was looking at me was different from every other person at that table. It wasn't pity, it was something else entirely. I could leave. I could stand up, put my napkin on the chair, walk out, and never come back. I'd done it before, in smaller ways. Stopped calling on Sundays, stopped texting photos of milestones, stopped expecting the reply that never came. But leaving tonight wouldn't be a statement. It would just be expected. Janet would shake her head, say she's always been sensitive, and the evening would continue without a ripple. So I sat there, and I thought about 29 years, the business license. Cute. My first franchise location. A 3-bedroom office in Columbus with my name on the lease. I'd called home to share the news. Janet said she was busy prepping for Lauren's birthday brunch, the Inc. magazine interview. I never even sent it. Not because I was afraid she'd dismiss it. I was afraid she'd find a way to make it about herself. Well, I raised her, she'd tell the church. She'd frame it on the mantel next to Lauren's sorority photo. She'd take credit for the thing she spent 2 decades belittling. So I kept it. Kept all of it. My company, my revenue, my name in print. I kept it in a world she never entered because she never asked to. I looked across the room at Lauren. She was laughing at something Kevin said. But her eyes drifted toward me, brief, guilty. She looked away fast. Even Lauren couldn't save me in this house. She never could. But tonight wasn't about being saved. Tonight, for the first time, I wanted to know if I was strong enough to sit in the room where I'd always been erased, and not collapse. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, stayed. I wonder, why did I keep going back to that table? Have you ever kept showing up somewhere you knew you'd be treated like you didn't matter? Why do you think we do that? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. Janet was 3 glasses of Chardonnay in and performing for the Holloways like her life depended on it. She leaned toward Diane, gesturing with her fork. We tried everything with Morgan, piano lessons, ballet, church camp one summer. Nothing stuck. Pam Driscoll, Janet's closest friend, seated 2 chairs down, laughed on cue. Well, at least she knows hard work. Janet tilted her head. Hard work? She scrubs toilets, Pam. More laughter. Quiet, polite, the kind that sounds like permission. I sat at my small table, napkin twisted in my lap, and listened to my mother narrate my failure to a room full of people who didn't know me. Each sentence was a brick. She was building a wall between me and respectability, right there in public, and she was smiling while she did it. Diane Holloway did not laugh. I noticed. She set her wine glass down, carefully, deliberately, and folded her hands. Us residential cleaning? Diane said. Her voice was even, casual, but something underneath it was pointed. Do you know which company she works for? Janet waved a hand. Some outfit, I don't keep track. You don't know the name? It's not exactly worth knowing. Diane held Janet's gaze for 1 beat longer than comfortable. Then she turned toward me. Not all the way, just a quarter turn, enough that I saw her profile shift. She was studying me. The way you study a painting you've seen in a magazine and are now seeing in person for the first time. I didn't know why. Not yet. But the air at the table had changed. Something had snagged in Diane Holloway's memory, and she was pulling at the thread. Janet didn't notice. She never noticed anything that wasn't about Lauren. The appetizers were being cleared when Janet turned the spotlight on me. She twisted in her chair. That's that sugary voice she used when she wanted to seem generous in front of company. Morgan, honey, why don't you tell everyone what you're doing these days? I'm sure they'd love to hear. The room shifted. 30 sets of eyes found me. A fork clinked against a plate. The jazz from the speaker suddenly felt very loud. I set down my water glass. I run a residential cleaning company, I said. Flat, simple, no embellishment. Janet smiled at Diane. See? She says run. That's generous. A few chuckles around the table, soft ones, the kind people make when they're not sure if they're supposed to laugh, but don't want to be rude. Richard shook his head slowly, a sigh that carried the weight of practiced disappointment. Don't push her, Diane. She's doing her best. He paused, took a sip of his bourbon. Her best. The repetition landed like a slap. Her best, as though my best was something to mourn. But I pressed my thumbnail into my palm under the table, felt the sting, kept my face still, and then I noticed Diane. She'd placed her napkin beside her plate. Her fingers rested flat on the tablecloth, the way someone does when they're about to stand, or about to speak, or about to change the temperature of the entire room. She was looking at me, not the way the others looked, with second-hand embarrassment or polite avoidance. Like she was looking at me the way someone looks when a name is on the tip of their tongue. Like she was one detail away from placing exactly where she'd seen my face before. It was Lauren who broke first. Barely. Mom. Her voice was small, almost a whisper. Maybe we don't need to. Janet turned to her daughter with the speed of someone who's been challenged in her own home. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. I'm telling the truth, Lauren. What's there to hide? Lauren looked at her plate, pressed her lips together, sat back. 28 years of training. That's how long Janet had spent teaching Lauren that silence was loyalty. And right now, loyalty meant letting our mother dismantle me in front of 30 people without interference. I didn't blame Lauren, not entirely. I'd watched her grow up in that house. I knew the cost of speaking out, the silent treatment, the guilt, at the way Janet could make you feel like the villain for pointing out she was being cruel. Lauren survived the same house I did. She just survived it from the other side of the door. Kevin shifted in his seat. He glanced at his mother, Diane. And I saw something pass between them. A look I didn't fully understand. Diane was tapping her index finger against the tablecloth, lightly, rhythmically, a private metronome. Kevin leaned in. Mom, you okay? Diane didn't turn to him. Yet her eyes were still on me. Fine, she said. I'm just trying to remember something. She said it quietly, almost to herself. Kevin knew his mother. I could see it in the way he sat back, not dismissing her, but recognizing the signal. Whatever Diane Holloway was working through, he knew better than to interrupt it. The main course arrived, plates were set down, conversations resumed. But Diane didn't touch her food. She was somewhere else. Somewhere in her memory, a door was opening. As it happened between the entree and the bread basket, Diane set her fork down, turned toward me, fully this time, and asked the question that would unravel everything. Morgan, what's the name of your company? The table didn't stop talking. It wasn't a dramatic moment. Not yet. Just a polite question from the groom's mother to the bride's sister. Ordinary on the surface. Janet answered before I could. She leaned in, her hand on Diane's arm, voice wrapped in apology. Mrs. Holloway. Really? Don't trouble yourself. She just... Diane raised one hand. Small, unhurried, but absolute. I asked Morgan. 3 words. No edge. No volume. Just clarity so clean it cut through Janet like glass. Janet's mouth stayed open for a half second. Then she closed it. I looked at Diane. She looked at me. Meadowshine Residential, I said. The name sat in the air between us. Diane's expression changed. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic woman, but her eyes widened by a fraction. Her chin tilted, and she repeated the name, quietly, like tasting a word she already knew. Meadowshine. She said it twice. The second time slower. Kevin looked at his mother. He'd been watching her all evening. The tapping finger, the distracted gaze, the way she'd been circling something without landing on it. Now she was landing. Mom? He said again. What is it? Diane didn't answer him. She reached for her wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down without drinking. But her eyes hadn't left mine. She knew something. I could feel it. I just didn't know what yet. And neither, for the first time in her life, did Janet. Diane excused herself from the table. If you'll pardon me for just a moment. She folded her napkin, stood, and walked toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. Calm, measured, the way she did everything. Kevin half stood. Mom? 1 minute, sweetheart. I watched her go. From my seat by the window, and I had a clear line of sight through the glass partition to the corridor. Diane stopped halfway down the hall, pulled her phone from her clutch, and began scrolling. She wasn't checking messages. She was searching for something. Back at the main table, Janet had already filled the gap. She turned to Pam and another friend, voice low but not low enough. Thank God the Holloways are gracious people. Nobody's paying attention to, you know, a small tilt of her head in my direction. And I didn't react. I'd stopped reacting to Janet's narration of my irrelevance years ago. Instead, I kept my eyes on the hallway. Diane had stopped scrolling. Her thumb was still on the screen, but she wasn't moving it. She was reading. Then her hand came up, slowly, and touched her lips. And she smiled. Not a social smile, not a polite one. It was the smile of someone who just confirmed something they'd been suspecting all evening. She looked up from the phone and glanced toward the dining room. Through the glass, her eyes found me, and this time, the recognition was complete. Then she looked at Janet. then back at me. She slid the phone into her clutch, straightened her jacket, and walked back to the table. Her posture was different now, straighter, more deliberate, like someone who'd just been handed a card she intended to play. Something was about to change. I could feel it in the way the air thinned. Janet stood up, tapped a butter knife against her wine glass. The room quieted. "I'd like to say a few words." She pressed her hand to her chest, the gesture she used in church when she wanted people to know she was being sincere. "First, I want to thank the Holloway family for welcoming our Lauren with such warmth. Kevin, you are exactly the kind of man we prayed for." Kevin smiled politely. Diane did not. "I want to thank my husband Richard for being my partner through it all. Every sacrifice, every late night, we built this family together." She paused, looked around the room with glistening eyes. "And Lauren, sweetheart, you are our pride, our only pride. Everything we worked for sits right here, in this moment, watching you begin your life. Our only pride." She said it while I was sitting 12 feet away. She didn't glance at me, not even the peripheral kind of acknowledgement you'd give a coat rack. "Our family isn't perfect," Janet continued, her voice softening to that rehearsed tremble she'd mastered. "We've had our challenges." Now she looked at me, just long enough for the room to understand exactly who the challenge was. "But tonight is about Lauren." A few guests clapped, awkward, thin applause, the kind that fills silence because silence would be worse. Richard raised his glass. Pam said, "Hear, hear." I sat still. My face was neutral. My chest was not. Then from the head of the table, a chair pushed back. Diane Holloway stood. She smoothed the front of her jacket, placed both hands on the table. "I'd also like to say a few words," she said. And the room turned. But before Diane could speak, a man seated near the middle of the table, one of Kevin's uncles, gray beard, kind face, leaned forward and looked at me. "Morgan, right? So how's the cleaning business going? You run your own crew?" It was a genuine question. He was trying to include me. The one person at the table who saw a girl sitting alone and thought, "That's not right." Janet laughed before I could answer. "Business." She pressed her hand to her sternum. "Let's not get carried away. It's a van and some buckets." The uncle's smile faded. He looked down. Richard set his glass down and spoke without lifting his eyes. "Don't push her. She's done her best." A pause, a sip. Her best. For someone like her. Someone like her. Somewhere at the table, a woman inhaled sharply. Silverware stopped moving. I felt the heat climb from my sternum to my throat. Not anger. Something older. The accumulated weight of every dismissed achievement, every unreturned call, every time I was introduced as the family's footnote. But I didn't fold. I placed both hands on the table, flat, steady, and I looked at my mother. "Have you ever asked me what my company does?" Janet blinked. "Excuse me? In 14 years, have you once asked?" "I don't need to ask." Her chin lifted. "Oh, I know. You know nothing." 2 words. Quiet. Final. The table went dead silent. Not the polite kind. The kind where no one breathes because they're afraid they'll miss what comes next. Janet's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And at the head of the table, Diane Holloway set her napkin down for the last time. "Now," she said, "I'd like to say those few words." Diane stood with the kind of stillness that made movement feel unnecessary. She didn't adjust her jacket or clear her throat. That she simply waited until every set of eyes in the room found her, which took about 3 seconds. "Janet," she began, "I've listened politely all evening. I've watched you introduce your guests, give your speech, and share your version of your family. That is your right." Janet's smile tightened. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. But I cannot sit quietly while you speak about this young woman the way you have." Diane's voice didn't rise. It lowered, and that was worse. "Ma, not when I know what I know." The room tilted. Janet's smile cracked at the edges. "Mrs. Holloway, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. You don't—" "The issue," Diane said, "is that Morgan is not a stranger to me." She let that sentence sit. Kevin's uncle leaned back. Lauren's hand found Kevin's under the table. Pam Driscoll put her wine down. Richard stopped chewing. Janet shook her head slowly. You, you know Morgan? Diane turned to me. Her expression was warm, but controlled. The expression of someone who understood exactly what she was about to do and had decided it was necessary. Wait, she said, half to herself, half to the room. You're the woman who… She stopped. The silence that followed wasn't the polite kind from before. This silence had weight. It pressed against the walls and the windows and the ceiling. It pressed against Janet Meadows' chest. Janet's face went white, not pink, not flushed, dull white, the color of someone watching a door open that they thought was locked forever. And Diane Holloway was about to walk right through it. Morgan Meadows, Diane said. Meadowshine Residential. She paused, not for drama, but for precision. She was a woman who said things once and meant them permanently. I read an article about you in Inc. magazine last year, feature piece, 30 under 40, Franchise Founders Edition. The room didn't gasp. It did something worse. It froze. As 30 people suspended between their salad forks and their assumptions, Janet let out a short breath. What? Diane continued, her voice measured and unhurried. Your daughter owns and operates a residential cleaning franchise. 14 states, 87 employees at last count. She tilted her head, as if recalling a specific paragraph. Annual revenue. If the article was accurate, approximately $2.8 million. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, Million? Janet gripped the edge of the tablecloth. That's not… She couldn't… She did. Diane folded her hands in front of her. And I should know, because I'm one of her investors. The sound that followed was not silence, but it was the opposite. The sound of 30 people recalculating everything they thought they knew about the woman sitting at the overflow table next to a second cousin with a beer. Richard set his bourbon down too hard. The glass hit the plate rim and tipped. Amber liquid spread across the white linen in a slow, dark bloom. He didn't move to stop it. He just stared at me like I'd walked in speaking a language he didn't know existed. Lauren's hand went to her mouth. Then Kevin's younger brother let out a low whistle and immediately tried to cover it with a cough. Janet sat down, though she was already seated. Her body just sank, like the scaffolding holding her up had been quietly removed. Diane sat back down. She didn't rush. She addressed the room the way she might address a board meeting, factual, composed, without malice. I manage a portfolio of luxury rental properties across the Midwest, she said. 2 years ago, and I needed a reliable residential cleaning partner for our units. Standardized quality, scalable, professional. I found an article about a company that had grown from a single operator to a multi-state franchise in under a decade. She looked at me. That company was Meadowshine. That founder was Morgan. She paused to let the information settle, then continued. I reached out. We met. I was impressed. Not just with the business, but with the person behind it. I invested. We've been working together since. Then she added almost gently, I had no idea she was your daughter, Janet. In fact, Diane's voice softened by a shade. She never once mentioned her family. That sentence did more damage than the revenue number. I could see it land across the table, the quiet understanding that I hadn't been hiding my success from my family. I simply had no family to share it with. Janet's voice came out cracked. Morgan, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. At the woman who'd spent 29 years turning away, who replied cute to the first real thing I ever built, who placed her handbag on the empty chair beside Lauren so I couldn't sit there. You never asked. 3 words, the shortest sentence I said all night, and the heaviest. Kevin nodded slowly. Not in agreement with anyone, just processing. Lauren sat motionless, tears sliding down her cheeks. Not jealousy. As something worse, the slow dawning recognition that she'd been standing on a stage her mother had built by tearing me down. It happened like a tide turning. 1 person, then 2, then the whole room. Kevin's uncle, the one who'd asked about my business, turned his chair toward me. 14 states? How'd you manage that? The woman beside him leaned in. How many employees again? 87, I said. Full-time? Most of them. Yes. A man I hadn't been introduced to, someone from Kevin's side, looked over. Residential only, or do you do commercial? Just like that, I was no longer the footnote. I was the story. Janet saw it happening. I watched her face cycle through 3 expressions in 5 seconds: shock, calculation, recovery. She straightened up, pressed her palms flat on the table, and smiled. Well, I always knew Morgan had potential. Didn't I say that, Richard? I always said she had something in her. She reached for Diane's arm. We've always supported her, of course. Every step of the— Janet. Diane's voice was quiet, almost kind, which made it worse. 2 minutes ago, you told this table your daughter's business was a van and some buckets. She let the silence do its work. Everyone in this room heard it. The room didn't move. The jazz from the ceiling speaker played a soft piano bridge that no one listened to. To Pam Driscoll, Janet's closest friend, the woman who'd laughed at every joke tonight, slowly slid her chair 6 inches away from Janet. The wooden legs scraped against the floor. In the silence, it sounded like a door closing. Janet opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Richard stared at a water stain on the tablecloth where his bourbon had spilled. He hadn't wiped it up, he hadn't said a word, and for the first time in 29 years, Janet Meadows had no script. I looked at my mother then, really looked, and I wondered, did she ever actually love me? Or was I just a background character in the story she wrote for Lauren? Why does a mother choose to humiliate her own child in public instead of admitting she was wrong? I still don't have the answer. Maybe you do. Let me know in the comments. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatically. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and pushed my chair back the way you do when dinner is over and you have somewhere to be. The room went still. I didn't come tonight to prove anything, I said. My voice was steady. I made sure of that. I came because Lauren asked me to, because she's my sister and I love her, and I wanted to be here for her night. I looked at Janet. She was gripping her wineglass so hard her knuckles had gone pale. But I won't sit at any table where my existence is treated as an embarrassment. I let the sentence land, didn't soften it, didn't follow it with an apology. Then I turned to Diane. Thank you, I said, not for telling them about my company, but for asking me, when no one else did. Diane held my gaze. She nodded once, firm, warm, the kind of nod that says everything it needs to. I looked at Lauren last. She was still crying, trying to hold it together, Kevin's hand on her back. Tile, my little sister, who used to climb into my attic bed because she was afraid of thunder. Lauren, I love you. I wish you every happiness. I paused, swallowed. But after tonight, I need space. Lauren nodded. She didn't argue. She knew. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair, walked past the long table, past the 30 people who'd watched my mother erase me and were now watching me leave with my back straight and my name intact. I didn't slam the door, I didn't run, and I didn't look back. The parking lot was cool and quiet. September air, crickets. I sat in my car for 7 minutes before I turned the engine on. Lauren called at 11:14 p.m. I was sitting on my couch in sweats, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I almost didn't answer. But the phone buzzed 4 times, and I could feel the urgency through the screen. Hey, I said. Sis? Her voice was raw. I need to tell you what happened after you left, she told me. And after I walked out, Janet tried to recover. She's always been dramatic. You know how it is with— She gestured vaguely toward the door. Nobody responded. Nobody laughed. Nobody nodded. Diane turned to Kevin and said quietly, We'll talk at home. Her tone wasn't angry. It was cold, which, as Lauren put it, was somehow worse. Richard attempted damage control. He leaned toward Diane, voice low, almost pleading. Mrs. Holloway, please, don't let this affect— Diane cut him off without raising her voice. Mr. Meadows, I'm not judging your daughter. I'm judging how you treat her. Lauren said the room physically shifted after that. Chairs angled away from Janet. Conversations started and ended in whispers. 3 couples left early, citing babysitters, headaches, long drives, excuses wrapped in polite smiles. Janet went to the restroom. She was in there for 12 minutes. When she came out, her mascara was smudged. Yes, nobody mentioned it. Lauren said, Sis, I've never seen Mom like that. She looked small. I didn't feel satisfaction. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones, not your body. I hope she's okay, I said. And I meant it. Then I added, but I'm not coming back. Lauren was quiet for a long time. Then, I know. Ridgewood is the kind of town where news doesn't travel. It arrives. Before the breakfast dishes are cleared, everyone already knows. By Monday morning, the story of the engagement dinner had spread through every Bible study group, hair salon waiting room, and produce aisle in a 12-mile radius. The details varied. Someone said I owned 100 employees, someone else said Diane Holloway wrote me a check on the spot. But the core was always the same. Janet Meadows humiliated her daughter in public, and it backfired spectacularly. And Janet had spent 15 years building her reputation as the backbone of the women's ministry at First Covenant Church. She organized the canned food drive. She coordinated the Easter egg hunt. She was the first to sign up for every committee and the last to leave every potluck. That Tuesday, 2 families quietly withdrew from her prayer circle. No explanation, just sudden scheduling conflicts that would last indefinitely. On Wednesday, Pam Driscoll called, so not to check on Janet, to deliver a verdict. Janet, I think you need to call Morgan, apologize, properly. People are talking. People are talking about what? I'm her mother. I have the right to. You have the right to be her mother, Pam said. You don't have the right to humiliate her in front of 30 people. Janet hung up. She called Pam back an hour later. Pam didn't answer. I heard about all of this secondhand through Lauren, who called me every few days now. Careful. These tentative calls, like someone learning to use a phone for the first time. I didn't gloat. I didn't say good. I listened, and I said, I hope Mom finds a way through this. I meant that too. You can love someone and still refuse to stand in their line of fire. The wedding wasn't canceled, but it was postponed. Kevin told Lauren the following weekend, gently, over coffee at a diner halfway between Ridgewood and his apartment in Marion. I love you, he said. That hasn't changed. But I need to understand your family better before I marry into it. Lauren didn't fight him. She cried, but she didn't argue, which, for someone raised by Janet Meadows, was an act of extraordinary courage. Kevin proposed a condition: family counseling. A neutral therapist, 6 sessions minimum, before they set a new date. He wanted to understand the dynamics he'd just witnessed. He wanted to make sure they wouldn't repeat themselves. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your parents, he said. I'm asking you to see what I saw. Lauren agreed. Diane, meanwhile, had her own conversation with Kevin, over the phone, the night after the dinner. I'm not opposed to Lauren, she told him. She seems like a good person, but the way that family operates, if they do this to their own daughter in public without blinking, what would they do to a daughter-in-law? Kevin didn't have an answer. That was the point. When Janet heard the wedding was delayed, she didn't call Lauren. She called Richard. This is Morgan's fault, she said. She ruined the whole evening. She always has to make it about herself. Richard said nothing. He was learning that his silence, the one that had protected him for 30 years, now worked against him. Because silence, it turns out, is only comfortable when nobody is listening. And now, for the first time, everyone was. And Janet spent the next 6 months blaming me for a problem she'd set in motion 29 years ago. Some habits don't break easily, even when they should. Diane and I met for coffee the following Thursday. Her choice. A quiet bakery in Marion, away from Ridgewood, away from the noise. She ordered a black coffee. I ordered the same. She looked at me across the small wooden table and said something I didn't expect. I owe you an apology. I shook my head. You told the truth. I told the truth publicly, without asking your permission first. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I should have pulled you aside, given you the choice. Instead, I reacted to your mother's behavior and, well, I made a decision on your behalf. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, if you'd asked me beforehand, I probably would have said, don't bother. I've spent my whole life not correcting people about me. And how has that worked out? I almost smiled. Not great, Diane sipped her coffee. When I invested in your company, it was because you were smart and the numbers were solid. That hasn't changed. She set the mug down. But after that dinner, I respect you for something else entirely. What's that? The way you left the room. No shouting, no tears, no retaliation. You just stood up and walked out with your dignity intact. She paused. That's rarer than people think. I stared at a knot in the wooden table. I ran my thumbnail along it. I learned something from being underestimated my whole life, I said. The best response isn't proving them wrong, it's just building, quietly, consistently, and letting the work speak. Diane smiled. The work spoke plenty that night. We sat there a little longer. Two women, a generation apart, drinking black coffee and saying very little. It was the most understood I'd felt in years. 3 weeks after the dinner, my phone rang. Janet. I was in my home office reviewing a contract for a new franchise location in Michigan. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me, that old stubborn root that never fully dried out, made me pick up. Morgan, we need to talk. Okay? People at church are asking questions. Pam won't return my calls. 2 families left my prayer group. I need us to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes. You're calling because people are asking, not because you think you did something wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I was honest. You told 30 people your daughter was a failure, while she was sitting in the room. I said you cleaned houses. That's the truth. It's a piece of the truth, and you used it as a weapon. Silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, could almost hear the calculations. How to spin this? How to reframe? How to come out the victim? You were always difficult, Morgan. There it was, the trapdoor she always used when she was cornered. Make it my fault. Make it my personality. Make it Morgan's problem. Mom, I'm not cutting you off. I want you to hear that. I'm not disappearing. Then what do you want? I want you to stop lying. Not to me, to yourself. I won't come back to that table until you look at me and acknowledge what you've been doing for 29 years. You want me to get on my knees and beg? No. I want you to stop pretending. She hung up. I set the phone down, looked at the Michigan contract, got back to work. Lauren drove to my house on a Sunday in October. She'd never been before. I watched her from the front window as she parked, sat in her car for a full minute, then walked up the steps like she was visiting somewhere sacred, slow, deliberate, looking at everything. My house was simple. 3 bedrooms, a yard I barely used, and a porch with 2 rocking chairs I'd bought for company I rarely had. Inside, clean lines, neutral tones, and 1 framed photograph on the living room wall. Lauren stopped in front of it. Who's that? Grace Whitfield, my first client. She passed last spring. She looks kind. She was. She's the reason I kept going. Lauren turned to me. Her eyes were red before she even started. Sis, I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize for Mom. I'm not apologizing for Mom. Her voice broke. I'm apologizing for me, for knowing how they treated you, and sitting there, every holiday, every dinner, every time Mom said something cruel, I looked at my plate. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't, but I understood. You were surviving the same house, I said, from the other side of the door. She wiped her eyes, sat on my couch, looked around at the home I'd built without anyone's help. Tell me about your company, she said. Some not because it's impressive, because you built it alone, and I didn't even know. We talked for 3 hours, about franchise logistics and hiring challenges and the time I lost a client because a new employee accidentally broke a chandelier. Normal things, sister things. Before she left, she told me Diane wanted to expand the investment partnership. The dinner, it turned out, had opened a door neither of us expected. From the wreckage, Lauren said. Something good. I hugged her at the door. It's not too late to start. The month after the dinner was the quietest of my life, and the fullest. I didn't call Janet, didn't call Richard. I let the silence sit between us, not as punishment, but as space. The space I should have claimed decades ago. I went to work. I reviewed applications for 2 new franchise locations. I hosted a team meeting where one of my longest-serving employees, a woman named Carla, told the room she'd just put a down payment on her first house using the savings from 3 years of steady employment. I cried in my office after everyone left. The good kind. When my staff asked if I was okay, they'd heard pieces of the story, the way small-town stories travel. I said, better than I've been in years. And it was true. I'm not telling you this story to show off a revenue number or an investor's name. I'm telling it because somewhere out there, when someone is sitting at the end of a table, at a family dinner being introduced as the disappointment, and they're wondering if it's true. It's not. You don't need anyone's permission to succeed. You don't need anyone's acknowledgement to make your success real. And you absolutely do not need to accept being humiliated just to keep your seat at the table. A boundary is not a wall, it's a door, and you get to choose who walks through it. My mother hasn't apologized, my father hasn't called. I don't know if they ever will, but I know this. My name is Morgan Meadows. I started with a bucket, a sponge, and a woman named Grace who saw something in me that my own parents refused to see. And I built something that speaks for itself, even when they wouldn't let me. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. If you've ever had to set a boundary with your own family, a hard one, the kind that costs you sleep, I want to hear about it. And drop your story in the comments. You're not alone in this. If this video moved you, hit like and share. Not for me. For the person in your life who needs to hear that walking away from a toxic table isn't weakness, it's strength. And if you want to hear another story like this one, there's a link in the description. I think you'll connect with it. I'll see you there.